Hey Slayers, welcome back to another week of Slayer and Empress podcast. I'm here with our film guru Jake. Say hello to the people, Jake.
No.
Just some words of wisdom, a grocery list, anything.
Absolutely not. I'm not a fortune cookie.
Yeah, you got a pretty interesting fortune cookie the other day. What was it? It wasn't like when a door closes, a window opens or something like that. What was that?
Tell you what, I can't remember what fortune cookie you're talking about, but do you remember that one 3-in-1 fortune that I got that one time?
Yeah, and that was after a long stint of not getting any fortunes at all.
For the longest time, for the listeners out there, I would crack a fortune cookie, and I'm not just talking one or two times. I'm talking like for months. We would go to Panda Express or just any other little Chinese food place in town, and I'd crack a fortune cookie, and there would be no fortune in the cookie. And I mean, for months it was like that. And then finally one day I cracked the fortune cookie, and there were 3 fortunes still stuck together, all in the same cookie. I still have the fortune to this day. I keep it in the back of my phone because, like, when else are you going to get a super fortune like that? And they're every single one of them relevant. I'll talk about it, at a future point too. But
Yeah. Well, this week we're reading the next chapter of Bifrost. It's a good one. I like this chapter.
Yeah. So can you tease a little bit before we get into it?
Tease a little bit. I think you recall at the end of the last Empress episode, we were talking about how we're gonna kind of have a war council here. We're going to discuss some of the dangers, where we're going, get some of the general plot of the story out of the way so we kind of know what to expect.
And I know I remember last time, because I just edit this the other day? I feel like I did.
I think you did.
Yeah. Well, not this, but the last episode anyway. I remember making a comment last episode about her calling Kirk out for being old.
Mm-hmm.
Is that sort of tension still going to ride through, or are we going to get really back into business here?
Yeah. These two are flirts. They're gigantic flirts. They just like to poke fun of each other. So we're gonna get a little bit of the heat, a little bit of the tension, and we do have some kissy. Now, where did we fall on the kissy talk? Are we going to read the interesting parts of this book, or are we just going to kind of let the listeners?
Yeah, I think we keep this as PG-13 as possible.
All right, for the kids.
Yeah, I think we keep this as PG-13 as possible.
All right, I agree with that.
Like OnlyFans, if you want the good stuff, you can pay for it.
And you can't pay for it on SlayerPublishing.com, where you can get all the good stuff. All right, let's get into it.
All right.
Here we go. The bright sun in Karth warmed Astrid's cheeks as she stood above the courtyard of the council tower. In the view, she could see the common people bartering in the busy marketplace outside of the castle walls, and wagons coming and going from the iron gates. She found that she received common responses when nearing humans she came across: intrigue or fear. Although she looked just as a third of Karth's people did, her air of mystery brought on interesting tales of origin that she had overheard, although none had been correct quite yet. There had been a time when not only humans lived in man's countryside. Though the continent had been split into 4, the elves in the western seaside state of Vertan, the dwarves in the southern forested cliffs of Hiatsi, the men in the central northern grasslands of Karth, and the Orpharn in the eastern mountains of Narathal, had once commingled, exchanging goods, travel, and currency. Now, the dwarves rarely left their crack in Midgard's surface, and the Orpharn were forbidden to dwell past their ash mountains. An order per the treaty established only a few decades before that was now being ignored. 300 years of fighting, followed by 40 years of peace, and now fighting again. Such was the cycle of war. "Good morning," Astrid heard behind her from the council chamber entrance. Astrid turned to Kirk, happy to see that he looked better rested than when she had left him. His dark armless tunic was boastful, his long, muscular arms bonded in gold just as hers were, but her dress was cream, with the side laced intricately like a corset from her hip to the crook of her arm. The slit in the side showcased one of her smooth sable legs, and the gold armbands on both her arms matched the thin gold necklace hanging from her graceful neck that fell in the valley on her chest. The dress hung closely to her curvy body, displaying her large hips, her slim waist, and her large bust. Opposites they were again. "Good morning, Lord Verduque. You look well." He smiled and raised his chin with confidence. She was an endless flatterer. "As do you, Valkyrie." And she did. Dressed more casually than the night before, she still sacrificed none of her beauty. Her hair was particularly fine, where instead of a head full of curls, she had long twisted strands bound in gold with only loose long curls nearest her face. Her soft brown cheeks carried undertones of red and peeked over her small nose. Soft angled brows arched near her hairline, with seemingly no hairs out of place. Astrid laughed abruptly as she sensed his curiosity. This feeling was familiar. "Are you wondering how old I am?" As Kirk turned red in response and rubbed his neck with bashfulness, she continued to laugh. It was only fair after the gift she had left for him. She approached him and patted his chest. Instinctively, he held her arm in place against his stomach and held her upward stare. She was cruel and unafraid of physical touch. Astrid felt his chest as the calm settled between them. The strength she felt in his body was addictive. He was home to unfathomable resolve, and she wanted him desperately as a lover. She raised a hand to the scar on his face, gently touching the raised blackened skin, and following it until she rested her palm on his pink cheek instead. She felt his focus on her as they searched each other's eyes. Perhaps trust was not built yet, but comfort already lived between them. "Still too old for you," Astrid said with silent joy. They would have to resist. She left him to stand on the balcony as she entered the council chamber. "Come and tell me how you would like me to assist you on your journey." Pleased with her chase, Kirk followed closely behind. Astrid descended the shallow steps into the council pit. The patterned blue carpet was threaded with banners and stars, deer, and wild animals. The large rectangle table was made of dark yew trees with Gothic chairs to match. At the head where the king's chair sat currently empty, pearl inlaid with silver on the wood's rim. Boar and elk lined the walls, trophies from past hunts, led by the royal family. She ran her hand on the cool surface of the table as she walked its length and sat in the king's chair. Kirk sighed and stood next to her. "I'm glad you feel at home." Her responding smirk told him to go on. "I want you to be our sorceress. If our circumstances are as dangerous as you stated last night, that will be where you benefit us the most. You were correct when you said our losses were heavy, and that was just fighting inwardly against countrymen that rebelled." Astrid leaned back in the chair. Rebelled against what exactly? Not dying? Was it so hard to believe that men would want to defend their homes instead of other species in the face of fear? There are some that wish us to break faith with the elves and focus our protection on ourselves. I have made it very clear that Karth will do no such thing. Astrid sensed familiarity. For honor or for self-interest? Kirk sat across from her. He was beginning to realize how difficult secret-keeping would be with her alone. It was true. Karth had long stood with Vertan for bonds that had little to do with honor. The elven King Durkot and Kirk's own father, King Baral Verduque, had been close for the entirety of the human king's life, and his father before him. To break faith with them now would be to tarnish centuries of allyship. Vertan and Karth are one. This war will not change that. Eric entered, breaking their conversation. He doubted Kirk and Astrid realized how close they sat. Clearly their night had been well. She was a fast worker. What I love about Eric is, like, if you a lady, you either a witch or a whore. Like, there's no in between with him. He's so out of pocket. Astrid felt Eric's distaste arrive before he did. His blue eyes hardened as he looked at her and bowed to Kirk. Astrid rose out of Kirk's chair. Comfortable or not, she would not cast disrespect on him in front of his men. To her surprise, as Eric finished greeting Kirk, he bent a knee in front of her. She nearly took a step back, but he grasped her hand gently and kissed it. "My lord told me you were responsible for healing my son. I cannot tell you what this means to me." Eric kept his eyes to the floor. Even if she was a witch, she had saved his son. He was indebted to her. Astrid touched his armored shoulder, allowing him to rise. His callous hand held her tighter than what was comfortable. "I was happy to heal him. Think nothing of it." He nodded and released her. Astrid was pleased. Kirk extended a hand to her. She took it softly and let him lead her to her seat to the right of him. "Thank you," she whispered as she settled in the chair. He remained standing behind her, leaning on the chair's peaks. Lords and ladies of the cities of Karth began to enter, taking their seats at the council table. With them all seated, one chair was visibly empty. Eric bent to Kirk. "Lord Carty and his men were found dead this morning, my lord." Kirk glanced at Astrid in confirmation. It was as she said. Lord Craig stood at the far end of the table and threw a half-broken blackened spear on the wood. This was found in his heart, his flesh. It was black, as if he was burned from the inside to the bone. Murmurs broke out in the chamber as the leaders panicked. One shouted, "Even from cuts, my lord. It is as if their wounds became diseased with hellfire." The seated council members scooted their chairs away from where the spear sat. Her curiosity piqued. Astrid stood and took the wood of the spear in her hand. Its jagged stem was warm all the way to its black iron tip. Soot seemed to cover most of its surface. She wiped the tip with her fingers and winced as it cut her deeply. Kirk watched as the council members gawked in horror. Astrid's face was unchanging as the blood from her fingers slid down her arm and her veins in her hand became visibly black. She closed her eyes briefly. It was worse than their fears. Not only was this weapon a god-killer, it had been cursed by the divine, and only one goddess held that power. She walked back to Kirk and placed the evidence she had warned him of in front of him. She reached into the fabric pocket in the fold of her dress on her rear and pulled out Narway, sweet lily leaves to heal her hand. She continued standing, her sudden fear making her anxious as she rolled the leaves back and forth in her palms until they turned black from the extracted curse. She tossed the used leaves into the fire of the nearest torch. Kirk felt his unease for the very first time. She looked deep in thought as she watched the torch's fire. "Astrid," he called to bring her from the depths of her mind. What could have her so startled? He gripped the spear and understood her fear immediately. Kirk knew this curse. He felt a phantom ache in the scar on his face. He knew it too well. "We go on with our plan," he said breathlessly. If it was a fight his mother wanted, she would receive it. Eric unrolled the map of Imrad on the table. Its wide width had clear indications of stops and keeps from Grothan to Vertan City. "We leave for Vertan in 2 days' time. Once we arrive and solidify a defense plan, we will send word to your keeps with instructions to enter Vertan. There we will establish shared villages to survive the winter." Lord Craig slammed his fist on the table. "How could you possibly justify abandoning our homes, our castles, to let those demons overrun us? To protect those damn elves?" Kirk's cold gray eyes drifted to the aged lord and called for him to withdraw his fist from the tabletop. "You are a fool if you believe we are fleeing to protect them. It's their protection we need. Our lands, our farms, are unprotected out in the open. In Vertan, there are impassable mountains protecting us from the Orpharn and any other invader wishing our people harm. We cannot guarantee their protection out in the open. That is why we have lost so many already." Kirk stood beside Astrid. "But with the elves' protection and Astrid's help, we may survive them before Fimbulwinter. The winter will be harsh and force them home." Rejection and shock escalated the noise once more as fear became palpable. Astrid grabbed the back of her chair for support as the emotion in the room overcame her, making her feel ill. She understood their fear and confusion. Fimbulwinter was the beginning of the end, and its crisp promise to be the world's harshest and longest winter was not baseless. Ragnarok would be inevitable. The world, Asgard, and many others would come to an end. This war had many more players than they had originally believed. How would one woman help us? A councilman shouted to the agreeing countrymen. She is a skilled healer and a sorceress not from this land. She healed the men in their northern encampment last night single-handedly. Her guidance to our own healers would be invaluable. Kirk's voice boomed over the others, requesting their silence yet again. Eric stood. What our Lord says is true. She healed my son. Astrid silently thanked him for his endorsement, but it was her explanation to give. Your Lord and General flatter me, but I have only used what I have learned being a priestess in the Sunlands. The fast recovery of your men can only be credited to their strength. You do not need my help, but I'd like to give it however is requested of me. Kirk eyed her as humility shone on her. The breadth of her river grew each minute she stood in his presence. A witch from a foreign land, how lucky for us, Lord Craig said somberly as he drank from the wine cup in front of him. Before he could set it back on the table, the cursed spear impaled Lord Craig's hand. Screams and gasps rang out as he dropped the cup on himself, dyeing his riding clothes red. Kirk walked calmly around the table to him as he screamed in agony. The black curse traveled up his visibly pale arm and burned his skin. He fell from his chair and crawled away on one arm, backing into the wall to flee from him as he approached. But as Kirk neared, he kneeled in front of him, his eyes furthering his fear as they vibrated in his mind. Something wrong, Lord Craig? Lord Craig? Kirk called as the man stared blankly at him in his seat, unharmed. Kirk gave him one last look of warning. His power was whispered, speculated, but unconfirmed amongst his people about the control he had over the mind. And very seldom did he use it to get his way. But Lord Craig had tried his patience time and time again. It was always he that spoke of Kirk's failure to overcome his father's shadow, and now to belittle Astrid, the moment called for a small lesson in humility. Astrid kept her eyes on Lord Craig as he looked at Kirk in horror. The Lord had been clearly disturbed by something as he looked at Kirk as if he had two heads. Lord Craig shook. He checked his hands and arms unscathed. It had all been in his mind. The spear was still planted in front of Lord Verduke, unmoved. Lord Craig will interrupt you no longer, Lady Astrid, Kirk assured as Lord Craig nodded and muttered an apology. The main convoy will ride out with me in 2 days. When I arrive and finalize our war pact with Vertan, I will send word to your holds to start evacuating. We'll be sure to have everything you need to begin life there while we wait out Fimbulwinter or this war, whichever ends first. Those of you that wish to hold your castles may do so only after informing me. I will not force you from your homes. Solace will be there for you if you should need it. But know this. Come winter, this land will not be what it is now. Scarcity and slaughter will run rampant. Anyone choosing not to flee should heed this warning. Kirk signaled for them to rise. They bid him goodbye one at a time before leaving to convene in the great hall. Astrid watched as they shuffled out of the room, all carefully avoiding Kirk's direct gaze. She could taste their cowering as they bowed quickly and passed. Something told her it was not his reputation or kindness alone that demanded their fealty. Eric, Kirk called. Has King Cloy responded yet to our inquiry? Not yet, Eric confirmed, biting back what it was that he truly wanted to say. The Dwarven King was no longer an ally. His recluse nature had assured that. Kirk nodded. Very well then. We will have to visit him once the safe haven is assured in Vertan. I doubt he'll respond to anything less than a war party at his door. Eric bowed. My lord. Astrid held her arms as she and Kirk were alone once more. Even they had much to be afraid of now. They were all heading into uncertainty. Thank you, she said. Kirk walked to the balcony, overlooking the courtyard where men had begun to train. He heard Astrid follow. For what? He tried to shake off the repercussions of stepping into Lord Craig's mind. Dark and clouded, he focused on the wind pressing gently on his ears and settled his mind. The remnants of memories and fears his victims left in his psyche took their toll each time. Astrid approached him from behind. Overwhelming sorrow and darkness covered him. She briefly touched his wide back. Whatever he had done to silence Lord Craig was not without consequence. For being gracious about our mutual calling, I feel that it has brought up pain for you in ways that you have not felt for some time. Kirk savored her comforting touch on his back. You're robbing me of my air of mystery, Valkyrie. I've allowed you yours. You reading my emotions isn't fair. Although he was turned away from her, she could hear his smirk. I apologize, I can't help it. She came to his side. His dark features with his playful smile made her ache in her belly. He was a damned attractive man. His black hair blew softly as he looked at her from the corner of his silver eyes. I didn't know Valkyries had your powers. His interest pleased her. We all read and change emotions to comfort the dying, but only I heal. I've been able to since I was young, but it's still hard for me to use. That is why I've studied healing amongst mortals. She remembered her time in the Sunlands fondly. She had gone to feel close to her mother's people and had found culture and comfort in a time where she had felt truly lost. And the fire, well, I'm just talented. Kirk enjoyed the clear fondness she had. Yes, you did say you studied as a priestess in the Sunlands. You journeyed there? It was a year's journey by sea at the very least. The last person he had known to make that journey was Durkot, king of the elves. She shooed away the thought. Oh, centuries ago. And it isn't quite like the way you travel. She laughed through her words. The winds of the Bifrost take us from place to place instantly. When I arrived, you should have seen the reception that their gods gave me. The colors, bright clay, orange and devouring plum red, she would never forget. Kirk furrowed. They had their own gods? Why would they celebrate a spirit warrior from another land? Asher continued. Nonetheless, I'm glad I can heal. It's relieving to be able to sustain life instead of taking it away. There's something deeply satisfactory in it. Her father's take on her healing was not the same. He had once told her that it demonstrated weakness. She shook his seated doubt from her mind. Below the balcony in the courtyard, his men had begun to train amongst themselves. She watched the burly men clash shields and wrestle. Your men focused too heavily on attack. I don't know if you've noticed. Kirk watched as a similar thought had just crossed his mind. We can't all be ancient warriors. Some of us only have one lifetime to perfect our skills in battle. He smiled down at her. She laughed and focused on him. I get it. I'm old. Didn't your parents teach you to respect your elders? His smile widened. It lifted his cheeks and made him look more handsome than he had before. They did, but they never told me that elderly and decrepit could look like you. Kirk was more serious with his tone when he said this, as if to say, come to me. And she wanted to, desperately. Kirk had thought about her when she parted the night before. He thought about how her lips would taste, and her intoxicating honey pools. He ached to swim in them, taking in her essence, surrounded by her. Astrid could tell he was no longer joking. She hadn't expected him to begin giving in to the attraction that they were both feeling. Aching lifted her core. She held his silver gaze while the world went on around them. Her body began to hum from the intensity of the connection they were sharing. You certainly know how to make an old lady feel good. Astrid felt her knees weaken as Kirk stepped closer, their hands touching on the banister as he hung his height over her. She felt his hand lift to her jaw, his thumb pressing softly into her skin as he traced its outline and made its way to cradle the back of her neck. He pressed her chest in his abdomen. Kirk smiled as she lightly gasped. Astrid couldn't help herself. She wanted his kiss more than her next breath. He came closer to her own, their lips only inches away, sharing heat. Apologies, my lord. Sir Eric sent me to ask after you. A particularly familiar young blonde guard said nervously as he interrupted their intimate moment. He bowed to Astrid as well. Lady Astrid? Astrid smiled politely at Eric's son, nearly regretting healing him. Kirk didn't look away from the woman in his arms. Thank you, Dover. You can tell him that I wish to be alone for the evening. Young Dover bowed again and left through the council chamber once more. Astrid smoothed her dress on her midsection and took a breath. Perhaps a distraction was best after all. Alone for a whole evening? Kirk smirked. I was hoping I would not be. Astrid laughed with him and playfully hit his chest. Shouldn't the king be entertaining his guests? Her laughter licked his ears. Eric is better at these things than I am. He's more welcoming. I tend to enjoy my own company. He paused as she hummed in understanding. Would you care to see the gardens again? It's more beautiful during the day. Astrid quickly agreed. They began their walk as they left the courtyard and crossed the stone bridge leading to the gardens. At first they only spoke about preparations Karth had been making to defend their borders. He continued to tell her about the plant life as they passed potted plants of blues and yellows as they swayed in the wind. Several large trees were here and there, their roots far beneath the stone walkways. When he began talking about the architecture of Castle Grothin, it was obvious he loved his home and cared deeply about preserving it. It had been rebuilt after the civil war between the kingdoms and sustained heavy damages. Rebuilding it had taken years after the war had ended. They stopped in front of a bench and sat next to the largest tree in the center of the garden. Its branches hung low, letting its leaves, purple and honey flowers, drift with the current of the wind. Quiet for a moment, they appreciated each other's company. Astrid looked into the depths of his eyes, feeling at home under his gaze. She saw him smirk as she smiled with him. What is it like in Asgard? Kirk questioned, hoping to distract himself from craving to touch his lips to hers. He looked so good, resting his back on the dark wooden bench. His black hair waved along his earlobes and thick neck, and his beard cut closely to his neck, allowing her to see his full pink lips. Looking into his silver eyes became too difficult as they slid slowly down to her lips, and he subconsciously licked his own so quickly she could have imagined it. It is beautiful. The streets are paved with porcelain and trimmed with silvers and bronze. The nights are my favorite part. The stars float so closely you can see into the ether between realms. I used to sit outside of my village and stare for hours watching it go by. As she spoke, flowers fell from the tree and landed softly in her hair. He reached out and plucked them gently from her, each time letting his hand linger near her face. She held her breath as he did this, hoping to savor each moment he had touched her. When he reached for a third time, his hand went straight to her cheek and caressed her smooth skin. They leaned forward in unison, allowing their lips to meet. It was soft and light at first touch. She opened her mouth to let him slip his tongue in, and it became desperate and warm. He pulled her close by her waist, and she clutched the front of his tunic tightly in her fist. Astrid called out to the pale blue sky above her as white clouds drifted by, falling into the abyss in her eyes. She regretted not a moment of sneaking off together for a second's peace from their waiting war. But this proximity, the pull she felt now on her heart, returned her to the sinning flesh she was bound to. She closed her mouth as she came down from her euphoria. He lifted his lips off of her skin and wondered what thought her eyes held. Had he been too forward? Before they could speak, Astrid heard ethereal humming of war in her mind. A moment, my lord, she whispered before he could kiss her again, and reached out to visualize where the battle had begun. This every Valkyrie heard as a call to arms. As she saw Valhalla, its golden walls, stone cliffs, and green hills, she gasped aloud. I have to return home. Odin would not be pleased, but she had no choice. Her sisters needed her. She touched Kirk's arm as he frowned deeply. She hated to leave him this way. They stayed silent as they fixed their clothes, attempting to hide what they had done. He finished first and helped her lift the straps of her dress back over her shoulders. When she looked presentable again, he stood, letting her see the scars from his battles on his sculpted chest. He put out his hand for her to take, and she placed her small hand in his palm. He pulled her in close and kissed her deeply. He may not have plotted what they had done, but he would never regret feeling her soft body. Astrid felt pangs in her heart as he held her. Never had she become so quickly attached to someone she had just met. But each time he looked at her, she felt as if he was looking right through her, seeing the entity instead of the warrior. She finally understood what mortals meant when they proclaimed their affection. She imagined that if he left this world, mortal or beyond, she would never again be able to stand by herself. His gentle kisses warmed her lips as the wind flowed through the tree and shook it softly. She knew then that she would not be able to kill him. Before she could flash away, Kirk reached for her. He felt himself worry as her joy dissipated. Had he gone too far with her? Something wrong? He said. Astrid halted as he held her. I cannot say, but I promise Lord Verluge, I will be brief. He nodded and released her. He could not force her to confide in him, no matter how deeply he wanted that. He suppressed his growing urge to protect her. Astrid hesitated. She felt his worry. She touched his chest. If you call for me, I shall come. Kirk held her hand. I anxiously await your return. She stepped away from him and into the light and wind.
It's rolling. I'm live.
You're live.
I'm alive.
All right,
My
end of
goodness.
chapter 2.
I'm alive. I'm like that one guy in his dreams. He's going to be having nightmares for weeks.
Yeah, that's what I really enjoy about Kirk. He does not mess around. It's just disrespect, period. He doesn't care how well he knows you. He is the kind of guy who's going to say something if you're being disrespected. Like, he could take a lot of shit because he knows it's about that, but you don't disrespect a guest in his home.
Of course.
Yeah. Lord Craig was being an asshole. He deserved it.
Now, do we see any of Lord Craig going forward, or is this kind of a one-and-done character?
I can't say, but yes, we do see Lord Craig again, but not very much of him. And I can't say more than that because it actually does pertain a little bit to what happens in Nightshade, which was due to release on the 14th of March at current date of recording. And it sounds like we're kind of going to push it back a little bit just to make sure everything is primed and ready. But we also made an announcement that the first 1,000 people to subscribe to our mailing list on SlayerPublishing.com would get it for free. So they will still be getting it for free when the drop happens. And thank you to everyone who signed up. It was a great turnout. But yeah, we might see a little bit more of that next book.
All right. Okay.
And actually, some things, because while I was reading it too, there's a lot of foreshadowing, like we talked about, going on in some of these conversations that are being had at this table meeting, and some key points, like Kirk mentions that he recognizes this curse, and is actually similar to the curse that left him the permanent scar on his face. And remember, Astrid called him out for being divine. So a scar like that should not have happened. Right? Should not have been permanent. It should have healed. So we might get to see who exactly Kirk's mama is. Because we know his father was human. He was king before him. So that'll be interesting too.
So just to clarify then too, because we can assume based on that his father wasn't the one who's given him his
super intense mind control powers.
Is it mind control or is it just thought insertion?
It's a little bit of, it's control over the mind and will. which also relates to who Kirk is descended from, but we'll cover that too when we get to that.
And we don't have to end the conversation here. I don't intend on it, but I just want to clarify some things I think we mentioned in the last episode of the Film and Media podcast that we might be ending Bifrost coverage with this episode. Did you want to still do that, or did you want to roll into another episode? Are the things you're talking about right now going to thematically appear in the next installment, or is it something that the readers are going to have to hop on board with and really see where it takes them?
Yeah, I think from here the readers are kind of going to have to hop on because, we got our little bit of our little spicy. And we also got some really great plot setup. And I think at this point it would be a good chance to break away because if we continue, you're going to want to hear the rest of the book played out 100%.
Okay, so that confirms another episode then.
I think it's up to the listeners. I'll put a poll down below, and then you let us know. Should we keep reading Bifrost, or should we switch to some of our other fiction that we have for Empress fiction?
I don't think I'm going to cook you dinner until you agree with that third episode. I'm not feeding you. That's how this works.
You heard it here first. Jake starves me. And he's an amazing cook, so it's great when he cooks. It's really nice.
I have a little cage for her in the basement that I lock her in.
Feed me through the slots.
Yep.
Just push it through the slots.
She gets exactly 30 minutes of sunlight a day, a little bit of water, just like a plant.
Yeah, and I'm well watered.
My goodness.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us at this episode of Empress Fiction. We did combine our podcasts. I think it just kind of aligned with us a little bit more to keep it all in one place. So you can follow us on Instagram at Empress Fiction House and also at SlayerPublishing.com. We also have our personal handles at Author Irian and at Film Guru Jake, where Jake posts his wonderful photography. He's a very talented photographer. And
haven't yet, but I'll get to it.
Yeah, he's terrible at the social media.
Terrible. Listen, Instagram's being all glitchy as of recording right now. It's acting up. I'm not liking it. It can. I don't feel like fighting
blame the
Facebook.
platform, Jake. Blame them.
Damn the corporations.
Those damn kids.
You hear that, Zuckerberg? I'm coming for you.
Zuckerberg. Are you going to fight him in place of Elon Musk?
I will gladly fight him in place of him. Put me on the bill with Jake Paul and Mike Tyson.
Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
All right, he's going out.
We can be the warm-up fight.
Yeah.
We can be the warm-up fight.
I would actually be scared to fight you. You don't look like you're strong. You're actually very strong.
Well, I'm going to say right now, I'd be scared to fight Mark Zuckerberg.
Oh, yeah, he got jacked for it.
Oh, yeah.
He was ready to kick his ass.
Yeah.
He's been saying something in the board meetings that he was like, I've been waiting to kick this.
No. Did you see the training videos that he was doing? He was training with MMA fighters, like professional, like belted. Yeah.
Yeah, he showed me. I was a little afraid.
Yeah.
I was like, if that twig can do it, it's possible for anyone.
Elon said, I can beat him up, and Mark took that personally.
He said, want to bet?
He said, I have just as much money as you, and I actually know people, so let's start.
I'm like, no offense to Elon, but...
No, all the offense to Elon. That man's a monster, just as much as Jeff Bezos.
He looks a little old and dusty. Like, now is not the time to be fighting.
You see that picture of him on his yacht?
Yeah.
Pale old pasty, looking like Elmer's glue.
See, all he do is spend his money. That's why.
What money?
You better spend money on a coat. Ooh, he said, what money? Let's get off before. Elon's going to be in our comments.
I don't know how much of this I can even keep. I think
we should keep all of it.
This might just be lost to the archives.
No! And, no, don't.
Okay, well, you have to say something about the book so I don't cut it.
No!
It's easy. I can chop it. Tie this back. Tie fighting Mark Zuckerberg.
Mark Zuckerberg to Bifrost. If you want to see Mark Zuckerberg fuck up Elon Musk as bad as Kirk wanted to fuck up Lord Craig. There you go. There's your tie-in.
There's the tie.
There's the tie-in.
Yep. If you have any kind of beef with Elon Musk, your Cybertruck came in and cut off your finger, get Bifrost, read it to completion, get ready for Nightshade, and Mark Zuckerberg will personally go to Elon Musk's house and beat him up.
Yes.
Right on the front yard. He said, catch me outside.
And to our Empress Fiction listeners, we're also switching up the way we do some of our Slayer media reviews. So we're going to be adding some movie commentary in there. I think we both really enjoy watching movies, and we have some pretty interesting takes. So it's going to be a wild ride. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for enjoying this episode of Empress Fiction with us, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, take care, guys.
Bye.